I am Marcus, 32 years old, and a successful software engineer, though my family never seemed to notice. This Christmas, I decided to host an elaborate dinner at my new house, hoping to finally earn their approval. I sent fancy invitations to everyone, including my golden boy brother Timothy. What I never expected was for my entire family to abandon me, or for Grandpa Franklin to show up with a gift that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Family loyalty can flip overnight, and you will not believe how this Christmas story ends. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in suburban Chicago. We were not rich, but we never went without necessities. My parents, Harold and Marilyn, provided a stable home for my brother Timothy and me. But from early on, the difference in how they treated us was impossible to ignore. Timothy was born when I was 4 years old. From the moment he arrived, it seemed like a spotlight shifted away from me and onto him. He was the cute baby with the infectious laugh, the toddler who charmed everyone at family gatherings, and later the teenager who excelled at sports and social situations. I was the quiet, thoughtful child who preferred books and computers to footballs and parties. My father would spend weekends coaching Timothy's baseball team while I sat on the sidelines, usually with a book. My mother would beam with pride at his school performances while merely nodding with mild interest at my academic achievements. When I won the state science competition in 10th grade, my parents attended but spent most of the ceremony talking about Timothy's upcoming baseball championship. As adults, our paths diverged even further. I pursued computer science, working diligently through college, and building a career step by methodical step. I stayed out of debt, saved carefully, and advanced through promotions, earned through consistent performance and reliability. Timothy, meanwhile, dropped out of college after 2 years to become an entrepreneur. He had the gift of gab and could sell anything to anyone. Timothy's business ventures were a roller coaster. He would launch a company with great fanfare, attract investors with his charisma, then usually watch it collapse within a year or two. But somehow he always landed on his feet, launching the next big idea with undiminished enthusiasm. Our parents funded several of his failed startups, draining a significant portion of their retirement savings in the process. I offered financial advice. They ignored it. I suggested more stable career paths for Timothy. They dismissed me as being jealous of his ambition. When I was promoted to senior developer at my company, my mother asked if that meant I would finally be able to help Timothy with his latest business idea. Last year, I hosted Christmas at my apartment. It was modest but comfortable, and I spent days preparing a homemade meal. My mother spent the evening commenting on the limited space and outdated kitchen. My father barely spoke to me, engrossed in conversation with Timothy about his latest venture, a luxury dog accessory brand that was supposedly about to be featured in a major magazine. My aunts and uncles gravitated toward Timothy's entertaining stories while I washed dishes alone. This year was supposed to be different. 3 months ago, I received a substantial promotion to senior systems architect, nearly doubling my salary. I finally had enough for a down payment on a beautiful colonial-style house in a prestigious neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a spacious backyard. For the first time, I felt I had achieved something that even my family could not diminish. I decided to host Christmas again, but this time I would spare no expense. I sent personalized invitations on premium cardstock to my parents, Timothy, both sets of grandparents, and my aunts, uncles, and cousins. 12 people total. I hired a professional decorator to transform my new home into a winter wonderland, with a 10-foot Christmas tree in the foyer, garlands on the staircase, and tasteful lighting throughout the house. I contracted a high-end catering company to prepare a gourmet meal featuring prime rib lobster tails and all the traditional sides elevated with professional culinary techniques. I ordered a selection of fine wines recommended by a sommelier. I even hired a professional pianist to provide ambient music during the cocktail hour. For gifts, I researched what each family member would truly appreciate. For my father, a rare bourbon he once mentioned. For my mother, a cashmere sweater from her favorite designer. For Timothy, the latest smartwatch he had been eyeing. For my grandparents, framed restored photos from their wedding day. Each gift was thoughtfully selected and expensively wrapped. I created a seating chart with personalized place settings. I planned a sequence of Christmas activities from cocktails by the fireplace to dessert and coffee in the conservatory. I even prepared conversation topics tailored to each family member's interests. As Christmas approached, my excitement grew, but so did my anxiety. I found myself rehearsing responses to potential criticisms. I inspected every corner of my home for flaws they might point out. I tested the menu multiple times to ensure everything would be perfect. This was my chance to finally show them I was successful in my own right, that my path was valid even if it differed from Timothy's flashier approach. The night before Christmas, I could barely sleep. I kept imagining the moment when they would arrive, see my beautiful home, taste the exquisite food, and finally acknowledge that I had made something of myself. I pictured my father clapping me on the shoulder with pride, my mother admiring the house, and even Timothy looking impressed. After 32 years of feeling second best, I would at last feel like a valued member of the family. Little did I know that Christmas Day would unfold in a way I never could have imagined, changing not just my relationship with my family, but the very foundation of our family structure forever. I woke up early on Christmas morning, too excited to sleep past 6. The caterers were scheduled to arrive at 10, with family expected at 2 for appetizers before the main dinner at 4. I spent the morning making final adjustments to decorations, chilling champagne, and arranging gifts under the tree. Everything was coming together perfectly. The house smelled amazing with cinnamon and pine, creating that classic Christmas atmosphere. The caterers arrived precisely on time and began setting up in the kitchen. The pianist came at 1:30 to warm up. By 1:45, my home was transformed into the Christmas gathering I had always dreamed of hosting. At 1:50, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin Allison. Great party at Timothy's. Didn't know you would be missing it. Hope everything is okay with you. I stared at the text, confused. There had to be some mistake. I immediately called Allison, but she did not pick up. I tried my mother next. Straight to voicemail. Then my father. The same result. Finally, I called Timothy. After 4 rings, he answered with loud Christmas music and laughter in the background. "Hello," he shouted over the noise. "Timothy, what is going on? Everyone was supposed to be at my house today." There was a pause, then Timothy lowered his voice. "Oh man, did Mom not tell you? She said there was a change of plans and everyone was coming here instead. She was supposed to let you know." "No one told me anything," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I have caterers here. I have been planning this for months." "Sorry, bro, I just assumed you knew and decided not to come. Listen, you can still head over if you want. We have plenty of food." Before I could respond, I heard my mother's voice in the background asking who he was talking to. There was muffled conversation, then Timothy came back on the line. "Look, I gotta go. Family photo time. Come by if you want." He hung up. I stood in my immaculate foyer, surrounded by twinkling lights and festive decorations, feeling as though the floor had dropped out from under me. They had all simply decided to go to Timothy's instead. No one had bothered to tell me. No one had considered the planning, the expense, or my feelings. I opened Instagram and immediately saw photos posted by my Aunt Rebecca. There they all were gathered around Timothy's dining table, which was haphazardly set with mismatched plates. My mother was beaming beside Timothy, who wore a ridiculous Christmas sweater and Santa hat. My father was carving a store-bought ham. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were all smiling, glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas with the perfect host. Nobody does holidays like Timothy." I sank down onto the bottom step of my staircase, still clutching my phone. The pianist, sensing something was wrong, discreetly asked if he should continue. I numbly handed him his full payment and thanked him for coming. After he left, I informed the caterers that there had been a change of plans. They were professional and understanding, packing up the food and leaving it all prepared in my refrigerator. Then I was alone in the silent house. The 12-place settings at my dining table seemed to mock me. The carefully chosen gifts sat unwrapped beneath the tree. The champagne chilled for no one. I sat at the head of my empty table, surveying the scene I had so carefully created. The fine china gleamed under the chandelier light. The crystal glasses caught and reflected the flickering candles. It was picture perfect, missing only the family that had abandoned me without a second thought. The initial shock began to give way to a deep, aching hurt. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, their attention, their love. I had achieved success on my own terms, bought this beautiful home, planned this perfect Christmas. And still I was an afterthought. Still, Timothy was the sun around which our family orbited, and I was a distant, forgotten planet. As the afternoon wore on, the hurt curdled into anger. I considered driving to Timothy's house to confront them all. I drafted and deleted a dozen text messages ranging from hurt inquiries to scathing accusations. I contemplated posting my own social media message exposing their thoughtlessness. But ultimately, what would be the point? This was merely the most blatant expression of a family dynamic that had existed for decades. No confrontation would change the fundamental truth that in my family's eyes I would always matter less than Timothy. As evening fell and the house grew dark except for the Christmas lights, my anger gave way to a profound sadness. I poured myself a glass of the expensive bourbon I had bought for my father and sat alone in the living room watching the lights on the Christmas tree blur through my tears. Outside, snow had begun to fall, adding a final cinematic touch to the perfect Christmas celebration that would never happen. The darkness beyond my windows mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. 32 years of trying to be good enough, of working hard and making responsible choices, of seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it. I realized then that I had reached a breaking point. Something had to change. I could not continue this pattern of seeking approval from people who would never truly see me. When the new year began, I would need to rebuild my life with different expectations, different relationships, perhaps even a different definition of family. But tonight I was alone with my hurt, watching Christmas slowly fade into night, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love me. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. I almost did not answer it. Who could it be but a neighbor with misplaced holiday cheer, or perhaps a delivery person with a package at the wrong address? But something compelled me to open the door. There on my porch, illuminated by my Christmas lights and dusted with snow, stood my grandfather Franklin. At 86, he was still tall, but stooped now with age. His once powerful frame, diminished, but still dignified. He wore a heavy wool coat and leaned on a polished walnut cane. "Grandpa," I said in disbelief, "what are you doing here? I thought you were at Timothy's." "I was," he said, his voice still carrying the authoritative tone that had commanded respect throughout his life. "May I come in? It is rather cold out here for an old man." I stepped aside immediately, helping him remove his coat and guiding him to the living room where the fire still burned in the fireplace. Only when he was settled in an armchair did I notice he carried a small, elegantly wrapped box. "Your home is beautiful, Marcus," he said, looking around with genuine appreciation. "You have done well for yourself." "Thank you," I replied, still confused by his presence. "Can I get you something to drink? Or are you hungry? I have an entire Christmas dinner in the refrigerator." "Bourbon if you have it, and dinner would be welcome." I left before the meal at Timothy's, Force Planks. I poured him a glass of the bourbon I had selected for my father and went to heat some of the food the caterers had left. When I returned with a plate for each of us, he was examining a family photo I had on the mantel taken at my college graduation. "Do you know why I left Timothy's party to come here?" he asked as I set the food down. "I assume Mom finally remembered to mention I was expecting everyone and sent you to explain," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Grandfather Franklin shook his head slowly. No one sent me. In fact, no one knows I left. I simply told the driver to bring me here instead of back to the retirement community." He took a sip of bourbon, nodding appreciatively at the quality. "I came because what they did was wrong. Inexcusably wrong. Your mother claimed she tried to call you about the change of plans, but I was sitting right next to her when Timothy invited everyone to his house yesterday. She never picked up the phone. Not once." I felt a fresh wave of hurt wash over me. It had been a deliberate exclusion, not a miscommunication. "Why would they do that?" I asked, my voice small. Grandfather Franklin set down his glass and looked me directly in the eyes. "Because Timothy's business is failing again, and he needed to impress a potential investor who was stopping by." Your mother convinced everyone that supporting Timothy's business opportunity was more important than keeping their commitment to you. He paused. And because, though it pains me to say it, they have always found it easier to love Timothy. His brutal honesty was somehow less painful than the excuses and deflections I had heard all my life. Timothy has always been the type of person who makes others feel special when he pays attention to them, my grandfather continued. He flatters, he entertains, he creates excitement. You, Marcus, have always been steady, reliable, authentic. You do not perform for approval. And some people interpret that as being less loving. They are wrong. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was excellent, though neither of us commented on it. I was still processing my grandfather's presence and his candid assessment of our family dynamics. You know, he said, eventually I built Harrington Enterprises from nothing. Did I ever tell you that story? I shook my head. The family business had always been a distant entity to me. Timothy had worked there briefly after dropping out of college, but I had pursued my own path in software development. I started with a single delivery truck after the war. Worked 16-hour days, reinvested every penny of profit. Your grandmother packed my lunch every morning at 4:30 and often did not see me again until 9 at night. He described the gradual expansion from one truck to a fleet, from local deliveries to regional logistics, from a small warehouse to the sprawling enterprise that now employed over 300 people across 3 states. I built it through honest work and treating people fairly. No shortcuts, no schemes, no charm offensive to cover up shoddy business practices. The parallel to Timothy's approach was unmistakable. Your father took over day-to-day operations when I turned 70, and he has maintained it well enough, though, without much vision for growth. I was not sure why he was telling me this business history on Christmas night, but there was something purposeful in his tone. Your brother has been drawing a vice president's salary for 3 years now, despite having no clear role or responsibilities. Did you know that? I did not. He has also taken out loans against company assets to fund his side businesses. Loans that were approved by your father despite the objections of our financial director. My grandfather sighed heavily, looking suddenly every one of his 86 years. I have watched you both since you were boys. Timothy always looking for the quickest path to reward, always expecting rescue when his choices led to trouble. And you, Marcus, working steadily, building your life brick by brick on a solid foundation, never asking for handouts, never expecting special treatment. He reached for the small wrapped box he had brought with him and placed it on the coffee table between us. I came here tonight not just to apologize for our family's unconscionable behavior, but to give you this. I had planned to wait until next week, but after today I decided it could not wait. I looked at the small box, hesitant to take it. After the day's rejection, I was not sure I could handle any more emotional complications. Open it, my grandfather urged gently. Please. I carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden box with the Harrington Enterprises logo inlaid in silver on the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a heavy ring with the same logo and a USB drive. Beneath them lay a folder of legal documents. What is this? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. That is the company's signet ring worn by the majority owner of Harrington Enterprises. The USB drive contains all the financial records and business plans for the past 5 years. And those documents transfer 51% ownership of the company to you, effective immediately. I stared at him in shock. But the company? It has always been meant for Dad and then Timothy. I do not know anything about running a logistics company. My grandfather smiled for the first time that evening. You know how to analyze systems, identify inefficiencies, and implement solutions. You know how to work hard and make difficult decisions based on facts rather than emotions. You know how to treat people with respect and dignity. That is what running a company requires. He explained that he had never fully transferred control to my father, maintaining majority ownership while allowing him operational authority. He had observed both Timothy and me over the years, waiting to see who would demonstrate the character needed to steward the family legacy. Timothy has been embezzling from the company for over a year, he said flatly. Small amounts cleverly hidden, but embezzlement nonetheless. Your father either does not know or chooses not to see it. The company will not survive another generation under such leadership. I picked up the signet ring, feeling its weight in my palm. Why me? I never showed any interest in the family business. Precisely because you never asked for it. You never felt entitled to it. You built your own success instead. My grandfather leaned forward. The documents are already filed with our corporate attorneys. All that remains is for you to decide whether to accept the responsibility. Do my parents know about this? Does Timothy? No one knows except our head legal counsel. I imagine there will be quite a scene when they find out. There was a glint in my grandfather's eye that suggested he was not entirely unhappy about that prospect. There is one stipulation, he added. You must take control within 3 days. Come to the company headquarters. Present yourself to the board and assume your rightful position. If you choose not to, the ownership reverts to the current arrangement. It was an overwhelming proposition. By day's end, I had gone from an abandoned holiday host to the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar company. I do not expect an answer tonight, my grandfather said, rising slowly from his chair. But I know you will make the right decision. As I helped him with his coat, he placed a hand on my shoulder. You were never second best, Marcus. Not to me. You were always the one I pinned my hopes on. Today only confirmed what I have known for years. After calling his driver to collect him, I stood in the doorway watching the car disappear into the snowy night. The wooden box clutched in my hands, my mind reeling with possibilities I had never imagined. I barely slept that night. How could I? The contents of that wooden box had just upended my entire reality. I alternated between examining the legal documents and pacing the length of my living room, trying to process everything that had happened. By dawn, I had made and remade the decision a dozen times. The vengeful part of me, still raw from the Christmas abandonment, savored the idea of walking into the company headquarters and watching the shocked expressions when my family realized what had happened. The thought of Timothy's face when he learned that his safety net had been pulled away was particularly satisfying. But another part of me questioned whether I wanted to tie myself to the very family that had caused me so much pain. I had built my own career independent of the Harrington name and connections. Did I want to dive into the tangled web of family business politics now? Wouldn't walking away be the cleaner break, the healthier choice? As the first light of morning filtered through my windows, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and opened my laptop. If I was going to make an informed decision, I needed to understand exactly what I would be taking on. I inserted the USB drive my grandfather had given me. It contained years of financial records, business plans, employee information, client contracts, and operational procedures. I spent hours analyzing the data, putting my software engineering skills to work, creating visualizations of the company's financial health and operational efficiency. What I found was concerning. While Harrington Enterprises was still profitable, the margins had been shrinking steadily for the past 3 years. Several major clients had reduced their contracts. Operational costs were rising faster than revenue. And there were indeed irregular financial transactions that appeared to be funneling money to external accounts, just as my grandfather had suggested. At 11, I called my friend Nathan, a business attorney I had met during a corporate software implementation. Without revealing specifics, I outlined the situation and asked for his perspective. Legally, if the ownership transfer is properly executed, it is binding. He confirmed after I described the documents. The question is not whether you can take control, but whether you should. That is exactly what I am struggling with, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away from my family entirely after what happened yesterday. Consider this, Nathan said thoughtfully. If you decline, who will run the company? My father. And eventually Timothy, I suppose. And based on what you have seen in the financials, what will happen to the company then? I considered the trajectory revealed by the data. Continued decline. Possible bankruptcy within 5 to 7 years, if current trends continue. And how many employees would be affected? Over 300 directly. More if you count the contractors and service providers dependent on the business. Nathan let the question hang in the air, its implications clear. This was bigger than my family drama. Real people's livelihoods were at stake. After our call, I went for a long walk through my snow-covered neighborhood, the cold air clearing my head. I thought about my grandfather building the business from nothing, about the generations of employees who had dedicated their careers to Harrington Enterprises. I thought about my own skills and whether they could be useful in turning the company around. But most of all, I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who made decisions based on hurt feelings and desire for revenge, or someone who accepted responsibility and did what was right, even when it was difficult. By the time I returned home, my path was becoming clearer. I spent the afternoon researching the logistics industry, identifying innovative approaches that might help modernize Harrington Enterprises. I drafted notes on potential efficiency improvements, technology implementations, and market expansions. As evening approached, I called a former colleague who had transitioned from software engineering to business operations. If you were walking into a leadership role at an established company with outdated systems, I asked hypothetically, what would your first moves be? Her advice was practical and actionable. Evaluate the current leadership team, identify quick wins for operational efficiency, meet individually with key clients to reassure them of stability, and implement transparent communication with key clients. Employees. By midnight, I had developed a preliminary 100-day plan for assuming control of Harrington Enterprises. It focused not on punishing my family, but on saving the company my grandfather had built. As I reviewed my notes, I realized something important had shifted within me. This was no longer about seeking my family's approval or proving my worth to them. It was about proving something to myself, that I could rise above petty revenge and make decisions based on principles rather than emotions. I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks. When I woke on December 27th, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I showered and dressed in my best suit, packed up the company documents and the signet ring, and headed to the corporate headquarters of Harrington Enterprises. It was time to claim my inheritance, not out of spite, but out of responsibility to my grandfather's legacy and the hundreds of people who depended on the company for their livelihoods. Whatever family drama ensued would be secondary to the real mission, saving Harrington Enterprises from the mismanagement that threatened its future. As I drove through the morning traffic, I felt a sense of purpose that transcended the hurt of Christmas Day. My family had abandoned me at a dinner table, but I would not abandon the company that bore our name. I would show them what real responsibility looked like, not through words or recriminations, but through actions and results. By the time I pulled into the executive parking lot at Harrington Enterprises headquarters, my resolve was unshakable. This was not about revenge. This was about redemption, renewal, and responsibility. And I was ready. The Harrington Enterprises headquarters was an imposing brick building dating back to the 1960s, with a modern glass addition completed about 10 years ago. I had visited occasionally as a child, but had not set foot inside for at least 15 years. Now I was arriving not as a visitor, but as the majority owner. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase containing the ownership documents, and walked through the front entrance with purposeful strides. The lobby featured a large company logo behind the reception desk and photographs, documenting the company's history, including several of my grandfather in his younger days. "Good morning," I said to the receptionist. "I am Marcus Harrington. I have an appointment with Mr. Vance in legal." This was true. I had called Lawrence Vance, the company's head legal counsel, that morning to inform him I would be coming. As my grandfather had indicated, Vance was aware of the ownership transfer and was expecting me, though he had sounded surprised that I was acting so quickly. The receptionist looked startled. "Harrington, are you related to the family?" "I am Harold Harrington's son," I replied simply. She quickly called up to the legal department, and within minutes a security badge was issued to me, and I was directed to the elevators. As I rode up to the 14th floor, I mentally rehearsed what I would say to Vance. This was the first step in a carefully considered plan. Lawrence Vance was a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He greeted me with a formal handshake and ushered me into his office, closing the door behind us. "I must admit, Mr. Harrington, I did not expect you to act so promptly. Your grandfather indicated you might need time to consider the proposition." "I have considered it," I said, placing my briefcase on his desk and retrieving the documents. I am here to formally accept the transfer of ownership and assume my responsibilities as majority shareholder. Vance nodded, examining the documents I had brought and comparing them to copies in his files. Everything appears to be in order. Your grandfather was very thorough in preparing this transition. He paused, peering at me over his glasses. Are you aware that neither your father nor your brother has been informed of this development? I am. I intend to address that today. Vance raised an eyebrow but made no comment. Instead, he produced several additional documents requiring my signature to complete the transfer process. As I signed each one, I felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on my shoulders. What are your plans? Mr. Harrington, Vance asked as he countersigned the final document. First, I would like to call an emergency meeting of the executive team. Then I will need access to all current operational systems and a comprehensive briefing on ongoing projects and challenges. Vance looked impressed by my businesslike approach. Very well. The executive team typically meets in the boardroom on the 15th floor. I can arrange for them to assemble at. He checked his watch. 1 o'clock. That gives us 2 hours to prepare. I agreed, and we spent the next hour reviewing the company's legal situation, outstanding contracts, and potential liabilities. Vance was professional and thorough, treating me with the respect due to the company's majority owner despite my youth and inexperience in the industry. At 12:30, Vance's assistant brought lunch to his office, and we continued our discussion while eating. I learned that my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, served as chief financial officer and had objected to several of Timothy's funding requests, only to be overruled by my father. Your uncle may be an ally, Vance suggested carefully. He has been concerned about certain financial decisions for some time, but has been unable to override your father's authority. At 5 minutes to 1, Vance escorted me to the boardroom where the executive team was already assembling. My father typically worked from home on Mondays, so his absence was not immediately suspicious. Timothy rarely came to the office at all, holding the title of Vice President of Business Development, but conducting most of his work from cafes or his home. The faces around the table were mostly unfamiliar to me, except for Uncle Robert, who did a double take when I entered alongside Vance. There were 7 executives in total, including the Chief Operations Officer, the Chief Technology Officer, and several vice presidents of various departments. Ladies and gentlemen, Vance began formally allow me to introduce Marcus Harrington, who as of today holds 51% ownership of Harrington Enterprises and will be assuming executive control of the company. The reaction was immediate. Uncle Robert's mouth fell open. The COO, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Gallagher, looked from me to Vance with confusion. The others exchanged glances or stared at me in disbelief. There must be some mistake, Uncle Robert said, finding his voice. Harold is the CEO and Franklin transferred operational control years ago. Operational control, yes, Vance confirmed. But not ownership. Mr. Franklin Harrington retained majority ownership and has now legally transferred that ownership to his grandson Marcus. I stepped forward, placing the signet ring on the table where everyone could see it. I understand this comes as a surprise. It was a surprise to me as well when my grandfather informed me of his decision 2 days ago. Does Harold know about this? Uncle Robert demanded. Not yet, I admitted. I wanted to meet with the executive team first to ensure a smooth transition. My father and brother will be informed today. As if on cue, the boardroom door burst open and Timothy stormed in, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is going on? The receptionist just called and said Marcus is here, claiming to own the company. Following close behind him was my father, looking equally confused and upset. The Christmas abandonment was clearly forgotten in the face of this new development. I maintained my composure, gesturing to the documents spread on the table. Grandfather has transferred majority ownership to me. These are the legal papers already filed and executed. My father snatched up the documents, scanning them with growing alarm. This cannot be right. Dad would never do this without discussing it with me first. Perhaps you should call him and ask, I suggested calmly. While my father stepped into the corner to make the call, Timothy advanced on me, his voice low and threatening. What did you do? How did you manipulate Grandpa into this? I did nothing, I replied loud enough for everyone to hear. This was grandfather's decision made after careful consideration of the company's future needs. Uncle Robert had been reviewing copies of the ownership transfer. These appear legitimate, he said, looking up at me with newfound respect. If Franklin has done this, he must have had his reasons. My father returned his face ashen. Dad confirmed it. He says it is his decision, and he expects us all to respect it. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and resentment. He says Marcus is now in charge. Timothy's reaction was explosive. This is bullshit. I am the one who has been working in the family business. I am the one with the business degree, even if I did not finish it. What does a computer nerd know about running a logistics company? I waited for his outburst to subside before responding. I know enough to recognize financial mismanagement when I see it. I turned to the executives. For instance, I know that company funds have been inappropriately allocated to outside ventures without proper approval or oversight. Uncle Robert straightened in his chair. I have been saying this for months. There are irregularities in the accounts that Harold refused to investigate. Timothy's face reddened further. Those were legitimate business expenses. Dad approved everything. We will conduct a full audit, I said firmly. For now, I would like to continue this meeting with the executive team to discuss immediate priorities and concerns. Dad, Timothy, you are welcome to stay, if you can participate constructively. My father looked as though he might object, but instead he sank into an empty chair, suddenly looking older than his 60 years. Timothy remained standing, fists clenched at his sides. This is not over, he hissed, before storming out of the boardroom, slamming the door behind him. For the next 2 hours, I led a productive discussion with the executive team, listening more than speaking, asking targeted questions about operational challenges, competitive pressures, and potential opportunities. I shared some preliminary ideas for technology improvements that could increase efficiency and reduce costs, earning thoughtful nods from the COO and CTO. Uncle Robert provided a candid assessment of the financial situation, confirming what I had already discovered from the USB drive data. The company was stable, but underperforming with concerning cash flow trends. By the end of the meeting, I had assigned each executive specific tasks for the coming week and scheduled individual follow-up meetings. I had also authorized Uncle Robert to begin a discreet financial audit with particular attention to irregularities in the business development budget Timothy had controlled. As the executives filed out, several stopped to shake my hand, their initial skepticism replaced by cautious optimism. My father remained seated, staring blankly at the table. I never wanted this, I told him when we were alone. But now that it is my responsibility, I intend to do right by grandfather's legacy and the people who work here. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life I saw uncertainty in his eyes. You really think you can run this company better than I have? I think I can bring fresh perspectives and needed changes, I said carefully. And I would value your experience and knowledge if you are willing to work with me rather than against me. He stood up slowly. I need time to process this. Your mother will be upset. I thought of the empty chairs at my Christmas table. Yes, I imagine she will be. As my father left, Uncle Robert returned, closing the door behind him. Your brother has been embezzling, he said without preamble. I have suspected it for months, but could not get your father to listen. I know, I replied. Grandfather told me. We will address it, but legally and discreetly. This company has borne the Harrington name for 3 generations. I will not have it tarnished by public scandal if it can be avoided. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. You sound like your grandfather, more than Harold ever did. He extended his hand. I think Franklin made the right choice. By the end of that first day, I had met with key department heads, reviewed critical projects, and begun implementing my 100-day plan. I had also arranged for a company-wide email announcing the leadership change, emphasizing continuity for employees and clients, while promising positive innovations to come. As I finally left the building at 9 that evening, exhausted but satisfied with the progress made, I realized that Christmas Day, with all its hurt and disappointment, had led to something unexpected, a chance to prove myself not to my family, but to myself and to the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including inevitable confrontations with Timothy and my parents. But for now, I had taken the first steps toward transforming betrayal into opportunity, rejection into responsibility, and abandonment into authority. The company's signet ring felt heavy but right on my finger as I drove home through the winter night, already planning my next moves. 3 days after Christmas, my grandfather summoned the entire family to his mansion in Lake Forest, a grand old estate he had purchased in the 1970s at the height of his business success. The formal invitation delivered by courier to each family member specified business attire and offered no explanation for the gathering. I arrived early at my grandfather's request. His health aide showed me to his study where he sat reviewing documents despite his doctor's orders to rest. "They will all be here," he said without looking up. "Your parents, Timothy Robert and his wife, your aunts and their husbands, the cousins, everyone. And they do not know why. Only that I insisted." He finally looked up, his eyes sharp despite his frailty. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. The past 3 days at Harrington Enterprises had been intense but productive. I had identified several immediate efficiency improvements, met with key clients to reassure them about the leadership transition, and initiated a thorough but discreet investigation into the financial irregularities under Timothy's control. I had also moved into the CEO office, a symbolic step that made my authority concrete. My father had been notably absent, though we had spoken briefly by phone. Timothy had not returned to the building since his outburst in the boardroom. "They will be angry," my grandfather warned. "Especially your mother. She has always protected Timothy from consequences." I know. I had been preparing myself mentally for the confrontation. But this is not about punishment. It is about saving the company. My grandfather smiled slightly. "Yes, that is why you were the right choice." By 6 o'clock, the grand living room of the mansion was filled with Harrington family members, all dressed formally, as requested, all buzzing with speculation about the purpose of the gathering. I sat quietly in an armchair beside my grandfather's imposing wingback chair, observing the family dynamics. My mother spotted me first, her eyes widening in surprise. She had been calling and texting since the Christmas dinner debacle, but I had responded only briefly, claiming work obligations prevented a longer conversation. She now hurried over, a forced smile on her face. "Marcus, darling, we have been so worried. You never returned my calls about the Christmas mix-up." Before I could respond, my grandfather raised his hand for silence, and the room immediately quieted. Even in his diminished physical state, Franklin Harrington commanded respect. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice stronger than it had been in private. "I have brought you here to announce an important change in our family business." My father shifted uncomfortably while Timothy, standing by the fireplace, crossed his arms defensively. 3 days ago, I transferred majority ownership of Harrington Enterprises to my grandson, Marcus. The announcement, though already known to my immediate family, sent a shockwave through the extended family. Aunt Cynthia gasped. Uncle Robert's wife whispered something in his ear. My cousins exchanged glances. "Marcus has already assumed control of daily operations and is implementing necessary changes to secure the company's future," my grandfather continued. "This decision is final and legally binding." My mother stepped forward, her smile replaced by a tight-lipped expression of anger. "Father, how could you do this without consulting us? Harold has dedicated his life to that company, and Timothy has been working there for years learning the business." "Has he?" my grandfather replied mildly. "Learning which aspects of the business exactly? How to misappropriate company funds? How to create shell corporations to funnel money away from legitimate operations?" Timothy pushed away from the fireplace, his face contorted with rage. "That is a lie. Those were legitimate business development ventures." "We have the financial records, Timothy," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "The audit is already underway." "You cannot do this," Timothy shouted, looking around the room for support. "Dad, tell them they cannot do this." My father looked trapped between his son and his father. "Dad, surely we can discuss this reasonably." Marcus has no experience in logistics. He is a computer programmer, for God's sake. Systems architect, I corrected, and I have spent the past 3 days learning more about the company's operations than Timothy has in 3 years. Uncle Robert, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. I have been working with Marcus this week. He has already identified several efficiency improvements that could save the company millions annually. His technical background is actually an asset in modernizing our operations. Timothy rounded on him. Of course you would take his side. You have always been jealous of my position. Your position? Uncle Robert raised an eyebrow. You mean the vice presidency you hold despite rarely appearing in the office? The one that comes with a salary disproportionate to any value you add to the company. The confrontation was escalating quickly. My Aunt Cynthia tried to intervene with placating words about family harmony, while my cousins watched the drama unfold with poorly concealed fascination. My mother turned to me, her expression a mixture of anger and pleading. Marcus, you cannot do this to your brother. The company was always meant for him. You have your own career. The company was meant for whoever could best steward its future, my grandfather interjected firmly. I built Harrington Enterprises from nothing. Do you think I would entrust it to someone who sees it merely as a personal piggy bank? Timothy's face paled. That is not fair. I have been developing new business opportunities. Like the luxury dog accessory brand that never materialized, I asked. Or the cryptocurrency investment that mysteriously lost all its funding. Or perhaps the fitness app that never got past a basic landing page, despite a 6-figure development budget. The specific examples silenced Timothy momentarily. He had not expected me to know these details. We have the records of every business development project you initiated, I continued calmly, including the payments made to personal accounts and the complete lack of deliverables or returns. You are accusing me of stealing. Timothy's voice rose to a shout. Dad, are you going to let him talk to me this way? My father looked increasingly uncomfortable. There must be explanations for these discrepancies. Administrative oversights, perhaps. $2.7 million in administrative oversights over 3 years. Uncle Robert shook his head. Harold, I tried to bring these issues to your attention multiple times. You refused to listen. My mother, sensing the tide turning against Timothy, changed tactics. Marcus, whatever you think has happened, we are still family. Surely we can work this out privately, without all these accusations and legal maneuvers. That is exactly what I proposed to grandfather, I replied. We will handle this internally. Timothy will repay the misappropriated funds according to a structured plan, and in return we will not pursue criminal charges. He will also step down from his position but will receive a severance package conditional on compliance with the repayment agreement. Timothy's face crumpled as he realized the seriousness of the situation. I cannot repay millions. Those businesses were supposed to generate returns. They just need more time and investment. They were failures, Timothy, my grandfather said bluntly. Some never existed beyond paper. Others were grossly mismanaged. The money is gone. Then I will go to jail. Timothy said, his voice suddenly small, the bravado evaporating. Not necessarily, I said. You own property that can be liquidated. Your car collection alone would cover a significant portion of the debt, and you can take a regular position within the company with a salary commensurate with your actual responsibilities, with a portion directed toward repayment. The offer hung in the air. It was firm but fair, offering Timothy a path to redemption that did not involve public humiliation or legal prosecution. You would make me work as a regular employee. Timothy looked incredulous. Under you. Under whoever is your appropriate supervisor based on the position I clarified. This is a business, Timothy, not a family clubhouse. My mother turned to my grandfather. Father, please reconsider. There must be a compromise that does not strip Timothy of his dignity. Timothy stripped himself of dignity when he stole from the company that bears our name, my grandfather replied, unmoved. Marcus is offering him a chance to restore it. My father, who had been largely silent, finally spoke up. And what about me? Am I to be demoted as well? That depends, I said carefully. Are you willing to work with me on the necessary changes to ensure the company's future? Your experience is valuable, but the company needs new leadership and direction. My father looked at me with new eyes, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You really believe you can do better? I believe I can do differently, I replied. The industry is changing. We need to adapt. A heavy silence fell over the room. The family dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The golden child had fallen. The overlooked sun had risen. The power structure that had defined our relationships for decades had been upended. My grandfather surveyed the room, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. The decision is made. Marcus is now in control of Harrington Enterprises. How each of you chooses to respond to that reality will determine your place in the company's future and in this family. As the implications of his words sank in, I watched the varied reactions across the room. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. Aunt Cynthia looked thoughtful. My cousins seemed impressed, if somewhat intimidated. My mother's expression was a complex mixture of anger, disbelief, and dawning recognition that she could not change the outcome. Timothy stood isolated by the fireplace, the magnitude of his failures and their consequences finally hitting him. My father sat heavily in a nearby chair, the mantle of authority he had worn for so long suddenly lifted from his shoulders. I think that concludes the business portion of our gathering, my grandfather announced. Dinner will be served shortly. I suggest we all use that time to begin adjusting to our new reality. As the family moved toward the dining room, some in stunned silence, others in whispered conversation, my grandfather motioned for me to stay behind. You handled that well, he said quietly. With firmness, but without vindictiveness. I learned from you, I replied. You built something that matters. I will not let it fail, because of family dysfunction. He nodded, satisfied. Come, let us join the others. The worst is over. Now the real work begins. As we walked toward the dining room, I realized that the abandonment on Christmas Day, painful as it had been, had led to this moment of clarity and purpose. Sometimes I reflected what seems like rejection is actually redirection toward a path we were meant to follow all along. 6 months after that fateful Christmas, Harrington Enterprises was showing concrete signs of recovery and growth. The modernization initiatives I had implemented were beginning to yield results. Operational efficiency had improved by 17%. Client retention had stabilized. And we had secured 3 major new contracts that expanded our reach into emerging markets. The transition had not been easy. The first weeks were filled with resistance from longtime employees loyal to my father's way of doing things, skepticism from clients concerned about the leadership change, and the emotional fallout within the family. But gradually, as positive changes became evident, the resistance gave way to cautious acceptance and eventually to enthusiastic support. My father had surprised me by choosing to remain with the company, though, in a reduced role as a senior advisor. After the initial shock and resentment wore off, he seemed almost relieved to be unburdened of the full weight of leadership. In private moments, he admitted that he had felt overwhelmed by the rapidly changing industry landscape, but had been too proud to acknowledge it. I should have brought you in years ago, he told me one evening as we reviewed quarterly results. Your technical background was exactly what the company needed. Those words, simple as they were, helped heal decades of feeling undervalued and overlooked. Our relationship would never be uncomplicated, but we had found a new dynamic, based on mutual respect, rather than unmet expectations. My mother had taken longer to adjust to the new reality. For months, she maintained a cool distance, unable to reconcile herself to Timothy's fall from grace and my unexpected ascension. But when the company announced its first quarterly profit increase in 3 years, resulting in bonuses for all employees, her attitude began to soften. The staff seems happy, she observed during a family dinner. Joan, in accounting, told me, morale has never been higher. It was not quite an apology for years of favoritism or for the Christmas abandonment, but it was an acknowledgement of my success, and I accepted it as such. Timothy's journey had been the most dramatic. After initially threatening legal action and making vague accusations about me manipulating our grandfather, He had faced a moment of truth when confronted with the detailed evidence of his financial misconduct. The choice between accepting my offer or facing potential criminal charges was ultimately not much of a choice at all. He had started in the warehouse operations department, learning the fundamental logistics processes that formed the backbone of the company. His charm and social skills, redirected toward positive ends, had actually made him effective in his new role. He was not a natural with systems and procedures, but he excelled at building relationships with the warehouse staff, boosting morale, and facilitating communication between the front lines and management. I never understood what actually happened here, he admitted during a check-in meeting 3 months into his new position. I just saw the money flowing in and thought it was endlessly renewable. The repayment plan was stringent but fair. Timothy had sold his luxury condo, his sports cars, and most of his high-end possessions. He now lived in a modest apartment and drove a company vehicle. 25% of his salary went directly toward restitution. It would take years to fully repay what he had taken, but the structured path forward had given him something he had never had before: genuine purpose and earned accomplishment. Uncle Robert had become my most valuable ally in the leadership team, his decades of financial experience complementing my technical background and fresh perspective. Together, we had implemented new financial controls and transparency measures that made misappropriation of funds virtually impossible moving forward. Your grandfather always said the right person would eventually take the helm, he told me. I think he was just waiting for you to be ready. Grandfather Franklin's health had declined further in the months following the ownership transfer, but he remained mentally sharp, receiving weekly briefings on the company's progress from his suite at an upscale retirement community. His satisfaction at seeing his legacy secured was evident in the pride with which he introduced me to his friends and healthcare providers as my grandson, the CEO. As Christmas approached again, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in a single year. From the abandoned host of an empty dinner party to the respected leader of a thriving company, from the overlooked son to the acknowledged successor, from seeking validation to providing direction, I decided to host Christmas dinner again, but with different expectations and a different guest list. My grandfather would attend, of course, health permitting. My father and mother had received invitations, as had Uncle Robert and his family. Timothy was included as well. Our relationship now defined by clear boundaries and mutual understanding, rather than competition and resentment. But I had also invited key members of my leadership team who had no family nearby, several friends who had supported me through the transition, and even a few employees who would otherwise spend the holiday alone. This Christmas would not be about seeking approval or proving worth. It would be about genuine connection and gratitude. As I oversaw the preparations, more modest than last year's elaborate affair but no less thoughtful, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned that sometimes rejection opens the door to unexpected opportunity. The Christmas abandonment that had felt like the ultimate familial betrayal had actually been the catalyst for my greatest professional achievement and personal growth. I had learned that seeking validation from those unwilling or unable to give it is a path to perpetual disappointment. True confidence comes from within, from knowing your own value regardless of others' recognition. I had learned that leadership is not about power or control, but about responsibility and service. My initial desire to take the company reins might have been tinged with thoughts of revenge, but the actual experience of leadership had humbled and matured me. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned that breaking cycles of toxicity requires someone willing to choose a different path. By offering Timothy accountability with dignity rather than punishment, or enabling, I had helped not just the company but my brother as well. By approaching my parents with professionalism rather than recrimination, I had created space for a new kind of relationship to develop. On Christmas Eve, as I put the final touches on the holiday decorations, my doorbell rang. It was my grandfather arriving a day early, his health aide helping him navigate the front steps. I wanted some time just with you. Before the others arrive, he explained, as I helped him to a comfortable chair by the fireplace. To tell you how proud I am. Of the company's performance, I asked. Of the man you have become, he clarified. The company's success is merely evidence of your character. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and enjoying each other's presence. You know, he said eventually, when I built this company, I thought I was creating a financial legacy for my family. But what matters more is the legacy of values: integrity, responsibility, fairness. You embody those values in a way that honors the Harrington name far more than any balance sheet ever could. His words touched me deeply. After a lifetime of feeling secondary, I had finally found my place not just in the family business, but in the continuity of values that transcended any individual or generation. The next day, as my diverse group of guests filled my home with conversation and laughter, I looked around with profound gratitude. The table that had stood empty last Christmas was now surrounded by people who were there by choice, not obligation. The relationships were authentic, the connections genuine. My parents arrived slightly late, still somewhat awkward in this new dynamic, but making an effort. Timothy brought a homemade dish, a small but significant gesture of contribution rather than entitlement. Uncle Robert raised a toast to the company's success and the family's resilience. And as I sat at the head of the table, no longer seeking approval but offering welcome, I realized that the true measure of success is not in what you acquire or achieve, but in what you learn and how you grow through life's unexpected turns. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disappointments. Sometimes the deepest hurts lead to the most profound healing. Sometimes being abandoned opens the door to finding your true place in the world. That Christmas night, surrounded by a chosen family bound by mutual respect rather than mere obligation, I felt a sense of peace and purpose that no amount of striving for approval could ever have provided. The journey from rejection to leadership had taught me that the approval I had sought for so long was nothing compared to the self-respect I had found along the way. What about you? Have you ever experienced a rejection or disappointment that eventually led to something better? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of family drama and redemption resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of overcoming adversity. Remember, sometimes the lowest moments in our lives are actually turning points toward our greatest triumphs. Thank you for listening, and may your own challenges lead to unexpected blessings.